Hello, my name is Josiah Lippincott, and you are listening to the first episode of Lippincott Talk, a show that I've been planning on introducing for a while, and it's finally time. Um, a little bit about myself. Some of you have probably followed me on social media for a while, so that's probably why you're watching this, and so I'm certainly a known quantity, but a little back history can help. Um, I graduated from Hillsdale College in 2016 and joined the Marine Corps from 2016 through 2020. Uh, while I was in the service, I deployed to Okinawa, and while there, I got really interested in the history of American foreign policy as it related to the Far East. And I began to see that foreign policy was connected to political life as a whole. And I decided I needed to dig into deeper questions. So I left the service in 2020, just as the COVID crazy was kicking up, and then went back to Hillsdale College to begin working on my PhD. So for the last 6 years, I've been invested in and thinking through questions relating to sovereignty, war, peace, immigration, trade, economics, finance, banking, with the goal of helping to better understand my own country and to be of assistance to my fellow Americans and to policymakers. As a citizen, I care what happens to my country. I care how my tax dollars are spent. I care about the law. I care about justice. So this is a show about justice. It's about what is the right way of life? How should we as Americans conduct ourselves in the world? And it's a vehicle for me to express the results of my research and to converse, I think, in a way that's um, it's easier in this way. In some ways, it's more of a conversation, and I think that's necessary and useful. We need to think clearly about our political life, and there is a place for in the intelligent and thoughtful citizen to engage with these issues in political discourse. And that's the way I see myself. I see myself as a student, a teacher, a scholar, a husband, a father, um, and as a defender of my country. And so this is a way of blending my vocations together and hopefully will bring clarity for the listener and for myself on issues of public importance. It is a little ironic that I would be introducing this show now due to the news cycle focusing so intensely on the war with Iran. Those are words I didn't think I was going to say. That we'd be at war with Iran is surprising to me for a number of reasons, and I also think it has unveiled a lot of problems at the heart of our regime and real questions that we need to grapple with. Already, the war fever has caused a lot of acrimony on social media. There's fractious debate among many on the right about the legitimacy of the war, about its purposes. And, these are conversations that are worth having. And I understand that the position I have is at odds with the president's. And I say this as someone who has supported him for a very long time. But in the end, my positions, the history of my positions are not as important as the arguments themselves. How I feel about the war, how any of us feels about the war, is secondary to what we think about it. We need to have clarity as to what we're doing here. What is the political project we're pursuing? So my goal in this first show is to address the topic of the war head on, and in a way that I think is serious, intellectually and morally. That's my goal. And to clarify my own position and to open up questions for others to answer in their own minds. If I could do one thing in this show, it is to push the members of my audience, both who share and do not share my position, to delve deeper into the questions. I think a thoughtful and serious person should have that attitude. It is not enough to simply consume content or to post on social media. And there's a place for all of that, right? There's a place for attacking your enemies and mocking institutions of authority and pushing for your policies. And there's also a place for thought. And I think this format can lend itself to that. Oftentimes, the podcasting world, as is so often obviously the case, is a kind of cesspit of lurid speculation and despair and kind of grifting clickbait behavior. And my hope is to break from that and to provide something more substantive and thoughtful. So let's get into it. Um, I set this up, when I did my notes for this show, I set it up as a series of questions. I think that can help guide thought, and we'll see where it goes. I think it's yeah. The first question I have here is what is the purpose of government? And I think we have to start there if we want to think through events like the war itself. What is the American government supposed to be doing? Well, the Declaration of Independence is a pretty good place to start. It is the founding document of the United States. It articulates a view of justice that animated our forefathers and that is with us even now. And the Declaration says that the purpose of government, the governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers for the consent of the governed to secure the unalienable rights of the people, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's a pretty clear and helpful statement of purpose. Government exists to protect, our government exists to protect Americans. And the other part of the Declaration says is that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. So there you have it, consent and protection. Those are the two lodestars that guide the American government in our view of justice. At least historically they have. And those are principles I agree with. I think you always have to see the aim. What is it that we're intending to do? And I believe that the goal should be to defend our person and property. That's what the goal of the American government should be, or the goals should be. And the purpose of war then is to secure those rights. It's defensive. The goal of the American government is not to rule other peoples without their consent. That's empire. The goal of the American government is to protect, and its just powers are derived from consent. So automatically the American founding document, the heart of our political regime, the foundation of our heritage as a people right here, is that we need to defend ourselves and we're not to go abroad ruling over others without their consent. So that's a key point, and it's something I'm going to come back to here. But just when you begin with that simple statement from our founding document, we then can look at the war in Iran and we can ask the question of, does this war serve those ends? Is this a war that's making Americans safer and more secure? And I answer no. And so from that perspective, I don't think the war is just. It isn't doing what wars should do. And there's a lot of argument now and a lot of claims about, well, this is part of the geopolitical situation and resources and maps in the Strait of Hormuz and international markets in China, and there's the state sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East, and we need to be prudent, with these Machiavellian power players practicing realpolitik, in the Middle East. I think that way of viewing things is often, in fact, it's almost always intellectually bankrupt, because it avoids the question of the ends to be served. So before you know it, when you engage in geopolitical reasoning and you're talking about these data points and interceptor missiles versus drones versus the Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain and blah, 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 blah. Once you get into that world, you're getting away from the core question of what are we attempting to achieve and what is justice? What is it that we are supposed to be doing? What is the American government supposed to be doing? And my argument is, and has been for a long time, that Iran does not pose a national security threat to the United States of America. From the obvious point, the Iranians do not and did not ever possess the capacity to land armed forces on the American shore and harm the American people. That is the truth. That is the reality. Okay. Iran getting nuclear weapons. I don't think that is a big deal. North Korea has nuclear weapons. So what? Pakistan has nuclear weapons. India has nuclear weapons. China has nuclear weapons. The USSR had nuclear weapons. What offensive good did those weapons serve? Like, what were they able to provide those regimes? In the case of the USSR, they had tons of nuclear weapons, and it made no difference. The regime still came apart at the seams. Okay, so apparently nuclear weapons don't prevent internal collapse from economic problems and ethnic strife. Okay. What about the case of North Korea? Part of the axis of evil. Since neoconservatism is back, we got to bring back, the language and terminology, the axis of evil. What has it mattered that North Korea has nuclear weapons? If anything, nuclear weapons in the case of North Korea have served the cause of diplomacy and peace. The North Koreans don't particularly like the United States of America, but they haven't launched nuclear weapons to wipe out our way of life. And why would they? They would be immediately annihilated if they did so. So even though North Koreans often chant, I was looking this up today. North Korea has had big rallies where they go and they all chant like "Death to the American imperialists" or some variation in Korean. And it doesn't matter, right? Saber rattling is a part of international relations. Countries get mad at each other. These tin pot dictators want to strut around. This is an ordinary part of political life. It does not mean that we need to be involved in managing these places. It is not obvious at all that the existence of nuclear weapons therefore leads to the logical conclusion that the United States needs to manage the world, that we need to manage every other sovereign nation's military, economic power, and its access to these destructive weapon systems. And I'm not saying this because I want America to be threatened by nuclear powers. But I do want to maintain we have a nuclear fleet and we have a doctrine, mutually assured destruction, which means that it is not possible for another power to use a nuclear weapon in almost any conceivable circumstance without being immediately wiped out. And so, from that perspective, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, if anything, has really been a movement for the end of conventional war. As bizarre as it may sound, nuclear proliferation among the sovereign states of the earth has been, in part, a part of sustaining peace, right? Kim Jong-un has nuclear weapons. Donald Trump goes there and makes a deal with him, which I think is actually one of Donald Trump's most important foreign policy accomplishments. And it was really a breaking with consensus. He went to meet with Kim Jong-un on the border and to pursue peace. That was a really admirable thing that Trump did, and really should have been more honored than he has been for that move. And it just showing that just because powers have a history of animosity doesn't mean that we can't have peace, that we can't work together to make, we have a harmony of interests, at least in one respect. We don't want to annihilate our regimes with nuclear weapons. And I do not think that Iran is an aberration from the global trend. Iranian leadership, such as it was, did not they were, if you read the speeches and writings that they release in English, it's all the same concerns that they have, that politicians here have. They talk about welfare and healthcare and schooling and the economy and retirement. And all those things, the ordinary things that politicians in any social democracy talk about, are the kinds of things that the theocratic dictatorship in Iran was concerned with. And it's true, they had geopolitical issues with their neighbors, and that led to factious war. But there was no reason, and has not been a reason for the United States to be involved in those conflicts. One of the core points that I've held to now for many years, especially as I left the military service, is that the United States has nothing to be gained from, we have nothing to gain from the Middle East. There's nothing there worth sacrificing American blood and treasure to have. No sea lane control, not even the economic resources that are present in that region. The question of resources is for companies and businesses and entrepreneurs. The purpose of the American government is defense. So whether or not American companies are able to buy things abroad does not have any bearing on the core purpose of the American government. The only time that would be the case is if there were a resource which our national existence depended on fully and completely for us to have from another foreign country. The reality is the United States has a huge amount of territory. We have lots of natural resources, and we also have a ton of coastline. The basic point is we have always been able to get the resources we need by buying them from abroad. American corporations have always been able to acquire the things they need for life here in the United States. So I don't think this is the justification then for ongoing war, that there are resources, or ongoing involvement in the Middle East because there are resources in these places. Related to this point, of course, is the fact that we have been involved in wars in the Middle East, and Iran was often opposed to the United States in some way in those conflicts. So we can see this in the Iraq War and the discussion, of explosively formed penetrators. A certain kind of IED designed to get through under armored vehicles in order to kill the crews. It's true, Iran provided weapons to forces that we were fighting in the Middle East over the last 25 years. Of course, the reality is we were there. Why are we fighting in these Middle Eastern wars? And the answer, of course, is moral crusading. The establishment class in the United States had a project of global hegemony designed to uplift the poor and downtrodden while defending freedom and democracy abroad. And the problem with that view, of course, is that it doesn't serve the interest of protection. So for the United States to sit here and then use as justification for war the fact the Iranians had an interest in their near abroad and Iranian firms and the government were selling weapons to entities that we were fighting, that falls apart on the logic of, wait, why were we involved in those conflicts in the first place? So again, there's another justification for the war that goes out the window if you take for as your founding principle the idea that the government should defend its people. We did not have to be involved in multi-decade long wars in the Middle East. That did not serve our interest, and it created conflict with another country, Iran, with whom we should have had peaceful or uninvolved relations. Like, you be over there and we'll be over here. That's the ideal model. And American companies will buy stuff and you can buy stuff from us. But then you don't have the political entangling problem of war and acrimony, and suddenly foreign powers are, we're involved in these very brutal and stupid conflicts that constantly afflict the Middle East. So, that's an overview of the kind of main thrust of arguments that I've heard to justify this conflict. But if you go back even further, and I think we should do that as Americans, the administration is talking about that they're ending a forever war. And then they're claiming that for the last 47 years, we've been at war with the state of Iran. And I want to push back on that claim. For one, that 47 years goes back to 1979 in the hostage crisis. In which the Shah was overthrown by the religious extremists that now govern Iran. Religious extremists, however you want to define that. That's the claim. The theocratic, highly religious element got rid of the monarchy to replace it with their preferred mode of governance. Well, if you go back even further, and you go back to 1953 when the United States helped install the Shah as the primary leader of Iran by coupping the domestic government, Mohammad Mossadegh, who was the prime minister of Iran at the time. So that was done in order to assist the British in getting access back to Iranian oil, because there had been acrimony between Britain and Iran over oil resources in the country. So the CIA then spent a bunch of money helping to spark a coup, and then we supported the Shah's government. So there you can see why there is a lot of anger at the United States in Iran, a sense that we have violated their sovereignty historically and have kept them from being able to exercise the kind of sovereign authority that they want to have for themselves and that we want for ourselves. And you can fight over whether or not that claim is legitimate. You can fight over the historical details. But it's helpful to understand the psychology and history that are animating our opponents abroad. When I was in the Marine Corps, we would call this turning the map around. And what we need to do is turn the intellectual map around. Why do our enemies and our opponents think the way they do? And the reason we ask that question is not so that we can reject any sense of moral rightness or to engage in moral relativism, but rather to better understand the world that we're in and to understand the real constraints that we face. So one of the real big problems in foreign policy, arguably the central problem, is that everyone thinks he's right. Every single regime on planet Earth believes that they are on the side of justice. There are no exceptions, right? There's always a belief that what I'm doing is good and the people who oppose me are bad. And the problem with that belief is when it's a subject of war, it can radicalize war. It can make conflicts far more brutal than they otherwise should be. So prior to World War II, there was a consensus in international law to demoralize conflicts by setting aside these questions of moral rightness away from causes of violence and war, right? So the problem is that we've remoralized war, especially in World War II. Now these conflicts are no longer about interests in a near abroad and trying to secure oneself in basic way regarding resources or territory or something like that. Instead, these wars become moral crusades. They're about freedom and democracy and about, securing the world from aggression. The common noun has risen to new importance in foreign policy thinking, and not to good effect. As we have criminalized war, we have made it to the point where the old distinctions that the old system could maintain, the distinction between civilian, government, and military, are abandoned. So during World War II, the United States intentionally targeted civilian, civilian structures and civilian, locales and cities. And the reason for that, and the way that could be justified, was by removing the meaning from the term citizen or civilian, right? Non-combatant, well, it goes away. You're justifying, well, they're war workers. So now when we bomb neighborhoods full of people, Japanese citizens and civilians, this is really about the war effort. But once you've done that, you've radicalized war. You've opened up new possibilities on which there had been a consensus before that those possibilities should be closed off. And this is a real problem. So that's the reason, primarily, I'm very unsettled by the killing of the Ayatollah, the outright assassination by Israel, with American help, of the leader of Iran. That was the head of a sovereign state that nations of the earth recognized and negotiated with, even when they didn't agree. And he was just flat out killed, outright, just assassinated from the air. So once you are living in that world, okay, the leader of a country is now a lawful target. That principle serves as a precedent for all future conflicts. And it's not a good one, right? It's not something I want here in America. In the old order, the view is the powers of the earth are sovereign, their militaries fight one another, but the governments themselves are separate from the militaries that do the fighting. And what this does is it allows the maintenance of domestic stability and the prevention of chaos and civil war during and after a conflict. And the goal is, when you have an enduring government, when you sign a peace treaty, it can endure for the long run. Because that treaty can be enforced by an entity that is not itself existentially threatened. So even when a nation loses a war, it's not pushed into doing radical, extreme things, partisan warfare, terrorism, because its government is stable enough and it's enduring enough, and that's accepted as a principle, that then you can have long-term peace. So from that perspective, I think the American and Israeli effort to assassinate large swaths of the Iranian government is a mistake. It's inherently destabilizing, and it's inherently radicalizing. It creates a problem for the future, and it's a problem that I do not want to have come onto, my own soil, into my own country. I do not want to see assassination as a mode of warfare. And the problem, of course, and the problem with all of these wars, and the problem with this war, indeed, is we cannot see the long-term consequences of the actions we're taking right now. It took more than 10 years for the consequences of the 1991 invasion of Iraq by George H.W. Bush to become clear to the American people. What initially appeared as an enormous success later turned into a huge problem that was very bad for American political life. It was fractious, it was divisive, it was expensive, got lots of Americans killed. And the result, of course, was not peace and stability in the Middle East, but what we see now, ongoing conflict. And a seemingly endless set of conflicts and acrimony between these states. The sort of core claim of the core claim of all of these interventionist forces is that we're always one war away from peace breaking out in an enduring way. And the reality of American history over the last 130 years is that very much has not been the case. We're always promised there's just one more crisis, and then we'll solve it all. Right? World War I is the war to end all wars. Once we defeat Hitler, everything will be solved. Once we defeat the communists, then we can have peace and prosperity. Well, now that we defeat the Islamo-fascists, then we can have peace. When we defeat the respiratory virus, then we can have peace and normal life. When we defeat Putin, then we can have peace in Europe. When we finally get rid of Maduro, then we'll finally see an end to the drug crisis. We'll see an end to the problems in Latin America. When the Ayatollah is gone, the Middle East will suddenly be peaceful again. Again and again and again, we've seen the same promises made over and over and over, to the effect that this is it. This is the moment that'll fix all of these problems. And what I'm going to suggest sounds radical, but it's and it is in the sense of going to the root of things. And that's what we need to do. We have to go to the root of things. But my claim is simply this: that model is not working. It has not worked. And what is needed now is the complete repudiation of the intellectual and moral foundations of the interventionist global management model that has characterized American foreign policy for more than a century. We have to go back to the foundation. We have to go back to the first principles that animate this system. And I hold that that project is very much worth doing by any serious American citizen. And that's my goal here, to flesh out that problem and provide alternatives and solutions. And I think one way that helps just to frame any issue is to have a firm and clear stand. I know what it is I want to see the American government do. I want to see it protect Americans. I want to see, and moreover, I want to restrain it from harming me and mine. The American state is this gigantic blob that sucks down resources for the sake of moral principles that they're harmful to me and my children and my friends and my community. I want to see that changed. And by the way, every time we go abroad to fight these wars, it draws us away from that core project of reforming our own regime to better serve the interests of the American people, right? And I think Donald Trump has been helpful in this project. He has indicated, and his elections have indicated, the need to which they're in desire for change in American life. You know, Trump really was, in his first term, he didn't start any new wars, right? And of course, he continued foreign policy that was there, and of course, the Soleimani killing and dropped bombs on an airfield in Syria, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is Trump very much had articulated a different way. He's opened up questions that before had been suppressed, and he brought them out. And I think that was a very valuable thing that Trump did. And it was a leading reason that a lot of Americans supported him in 2020 and in 2024. Trump was something different, and Trump is still something different within our system. Of course, the problem is, you know, there's been a sort of rush back to the same, you know, it's two steps forward, one step back when it comes to our global empire. And I think this conflict will, my prediction, and it's always risky to make predictions. I don't know the future. But my prediction is that these foreign involvements will distract from the very core and pressing issues that are happening here at home. And that's a real problem. Wars are inherently fractious and divisive, and you're going to see that on the right wing. In fact, you're already seeing it. And I know that the comments I make here are part of that division. But the reality is all of these things go together. Immigration policy, domestic regulation, the welfare state, the entrenched leftist interests, and our foreign policy, our wars abroad. All of these things go together. It is not a mistake that from the end of the 19th century, when America began its project of global empire and global crusading, that we have seen since that point a massive expansion in immigration from the third world. We have seen massive expansion in federal spending, a massive expansion in federal taxing. We've seen major expansions in administrative state power. We've seen a decline in our personal freedom. We've seen a collapse of many of the social and cultural institutions that were and still are healthy and life-giving. The way I frame this and the way I thought about this is the economy supports the empire. The empire does not support the economy. The empire is a parasite draining down the wealth of the rational and industrious portion of the American people to serve the moral, crusading, and ideological impulses of an elite class. And Trump, what made him so impressive in so many ways is he really broke from that consensus in lots of different ways. And the problem now is these wars can serve as a vehicle by which those interests can re-entrench themselves, or a vehicle by which other interests can shield themselves from much-needed scrutiny. Every amount of political capital that we spend arguing about the Iran war and paying attention to the Middle East is time that we're not spending here at home understanding how it is the left has managed to entrench itself in academia, in government, and even in corporate life through the nexus of government and corporate power. And I think that's a project very much worth embarking upon. It's very important. How can we have a country when we are constantly being buffeted back and forth by foreign powers that want us to be involved in their conflicts? And when our attention is abroad, it is not here at home. And I think that is a serious, serious problem. And it leads me to the what is my program? What's my solution? What do I have to offer? And I would say this: if I were advising the president right now, if the president was sitting right here, this is what I would say. It is this: we should bring the war to an end immediately. We should stop bombing Iran. We should stop the air campaign. We should withdraw our forces. We should shut down our bases in the Middle East. We should sign a treaty of amity and peace with the Iranian regime. We should acknowledge their status as a sovereign power. And we should tell the rest of the Middle East that they need to solve their own problems on their own without American help. No more foreign aid, no more military aid, no more subsidies for defense from the American people for the sake of industry in the Middle East. That is not the place for the American government to get involved. And it sounds radical, but it needs to happen. That is the goal. It is the goal. And if I could press a button right now and disentangle us from the Middle East, I would press that button. Right? That is the alignment of my intellectual and moral claims, the foundations of my thinking. And we can do it. We can do it. We can just say, we are done here. We are done sacrificing blood and treasure for the sake of these desert drama queens. Not our problem. We want peace. And the way to get peace is stop giving in to war. Just stop doing things that create conflict and suck us into wars that have nothing to do with in our interest. We can just say no. We can just say no. Nope, we're concerned with our own national defense. That's what we're going to do. And we can have peace and trade with all of these different powers. You know, there's all this talk about Iran is selling oil to the Chinese. Well, they could sell that oil to us if the American government didn't have sanctions on purchasing oil from Iran. American firms could buy that oil. We could have the cheap oil. We could have the cheap subsidy. We could force the Chinese to pay market rates on all of the oil that they're buying on the international market. Okay, there it is. There's a solution to that problem. You want to blunt China's, access to these resources? Stop giving them the subsidy in the form of sanctions. And those sanctions are in place because of this moralistic reasoning. Iran is bad. It's not the place of the American government to pass judgment on the rest of the world. It's enough for us to focus on on defending our rights and liberties right here. Let's be just right here. We can pass judgment here, right? Crime in American cities. That's something the American government should concern itself with. Preserving property rights right here in America. Preventing theft. That's something we can do right here. And again, so often the solution to violence and theft is for the government to stop engaging in both of those practices against, the population itself and against foreigners. One aspect of our regime is the extent to which the Federal Reserve constantly inflates the currency and thereby steals purchasing power from ordinary Americans. You want to reduce the amount of theft going on in our society? Well, the government has an easy way to stop that. It can stop stealing, right? There's a clear logical progression here. And I think what so often happens is prudential logic about geopolitics, and it's just too complicated. No one can understand this. It's just, you need to have like 3 PhDs and 2 master's degrees, and need to, also, follow all the OSINT accounts, open source intelligence for the uninitiated. We need to have all this information, then and only then can you make any sort of rational judgment about what our foreign policy should be doing, or what our domestic policy should be doing. And the reality is, however, that isn't necessary. We don't need to have, you can, as an ordinary American, your instincts, your basic sense of what is important to you can help you think clearly about foreign relations and the world as a whole. And you should not allow yourself to be bullied by those who, make reference to jargon and data that are designed to shroud more than they reveal. You can tell when someone is intelligent and their claims are morally consistent and thoughtful when you can understand what they're saying. A truly intelligent and smart person can make what is complicated intelligible to people who have good instincts and a sense of concern as a citizen for their own rights. An ordinary person should be able to understand. And a lot of the elitism of the geopolitical, the geopolitics enjoyers is the way I think about this. It's so often is designed to shroud basic moral issues that ordinary people could understand very, very clearly and do understand clearly. And it's a lot of smoke and mirrors designed to hide the truth. So that's the plan that I have for the Middle East is the Americans. We're not going to involve. We should not involve ourselves there any longer. A lot of expense and money spent. It's not a concern anymore. It doesn't have to be. We can go back to having a. We can keep that money here. Every dollar that the American government doesn't tax from its people is a dollar that's left for the people to use for themselves to purchase things that make them happy, right? And that's a good thing. You want Americans to be happy? Let them keep more of their own money. Let them keep more of their own resources. Don't take them from them. That's a simple solution to increasing the happiness of the American people right there. Just let them keep more of their own property. And, we can see this, there's a deeper, argument that I see on the right wing right now regarding whether or not empire is good. And a lot of those arguments, kind of come down to this. The moral empire of the neocons and the liberal internationalists was bad because it involved us in these long-standing wars. But a sort of amoral power politics empire will allow us to, exert control over the world. And this is, good because dominion is based. We shouldn't have to care what other people do. Empire, dominion, stretching out your territory. This is all serves our interest. It's manly. It shows that we're serious, have a sense of destiny, purpose. These are the kind of arguments I see in the right wing. And what I want to say is the empire is not inherently manly, and the amoral empire is not a solution to the problems of moral empire. Because the reality is all the imperialists, those who want to go abroad and extend themselves, they have a habit of all working together. The realists and idealists so often manage to merge into one when it comes to these foreign involvements. The option that isn't on the table is just remaining here and defending ourselves and having our good way of life, preserving our own happiness. So that gets rejected, and you then see these different factions, which are nominally opposed, come together for the sake of their shared interest in managing the world. And the point is, empire is not good for us. It does not contribute to our welfare, to our happiness, to our wealth. It draws down on those resources. And I don't think appealing to a restoration of a kind of manly spirit is a justification for empire. There are plenty of opportunities and plenty of need for manliness here, courage here. You need intellectual and physical courage right here in America. We have very real problems in our political life. We have a rabid left-wing faction in this country which uses state power in order to extract resources from decent Americans and give them to freak show ideologies which are harmful to our cultural and social norms, that are harmful to the things that made America great. And that's an area in which there is a great need for moral and intellectual courage, and also for physical courage, and a need for thought, the ability to think through how do we solve these problems in a way that prevents divisions here at home? How do we avoid imperial decline? How can we sustain the good things that we have for as long as possible? And tied to this question is the question of whether or not empire is economically productive. And as you can see, I'm touching on this in a lot of different ways. But the answer is no, right? It's when you take things from others, the thing you've taken from them is something they built for themselves for their own good. The reason that the productive man produces is because he's thinking of his own happiness. He wants to secure it for himself. And so empire and theft, by their very nature, are at odds with production, reason, and peace. So the thief always needs the productive man to produce. Otherwise, he has nothing to steal. And so from that perspective, we don't need to seize resources abroad, because by doing so, we're fundamentally then undoing the kinds of the stability and the harmony of interest that make peaceful production possible, that make for a world in which we don't have to live in constant danger of threats, right? So empire creates animosity abroad. It wastes money from the domestic population. It is inherently parasitic. It also it harms the sort of once you introduce the idea of might makes right into political discourse, anyone can latch onto that, right? So once you've got this idea, whoever's strongest should dominate everyone else, well, then you have a recipe for civil war. And my view of morality is that we should seek peace and avoid civil war and avoid the disintegration of our country. And the reason, that I support I support Trump and supported him in the past in these elections was precisely because I believed that what we needed was a return to sanity, a return to the restoration of the institutions and the ways of life that had made America great. And again, those are the empire and the you know the the peace of the American people do not go together. And this is a topic that we should confront head on. We should think very clearly about the kind of government we have and what it's doing. I have another question to frame my thinking here. Is the American deep state MAGA? No. The CIA was opposed to the American people before Trump got elected. It is opposed to him now, right? The domestic intelligence agencies, they are inherently built into a system that's foundation is managerial and leftist. They cannot be made based, they cannot be made to serve the interests of the American people, and they cannot be made patriotic. These institutions have to be abolished. You have to raze them to the ground. That's what we need to do to get our country back. So the idea that we're going to use this and it's prudent and we're going to do, nope. You have to start with the idea, how can we get every day, step by step, closer to the goal of eliminating these entities in an enduring way? That's what we need to do. So no, the American deep state is not MAGA. Do not confuse yourself by thinking that it can be or that it is. That is not the reality we have right now. And we, as the American people, should be very wary of those institutions, and we should work to dismantle them. That's the truth. I have another question here. Should conservatives denounce Trump over the war in Iran? No, I do not think so. Trump has done a lot of good for the American people, and he can do more in the future. He's got, right now, 3 more years in office, and there is a lot of good things that he's done that need to be continued. The increase in funding for deportations, the enforcement of immigration law, the security of the border, those are goals that are helpful. We need to restore our sovereignty. We need to know who a citizen is and who is not. We need to be clear about who should be allowed to join our political order and not. That is a huge question. And it's one that Trump has opened up through his policies. And it's an area in which, there's so much that Trump can do right there in American life and can continue to do. So politics and having a moral principle does not mean you just denounce people when they do things you don't like. You work to make changes. But you never abandon the core principle. You never abandon the core. What is the goal that we're aiming at? What is the thing that I'm trying to do here? And am I getting closer or further away from that point? When Trump is able to concentrate on his domestic agenda, he gets closer to the end point that we need. These foreign interventions, however, pull away from that goal. So that's why I oppose them. I want to get back to the things that Trump was doing that are good for the country and need to be done. And I think it's a mistake to think that Trump can fix all of our problems right away. And you see people despair and call out online because Trump hasn't solved something that they think he should, right? That's unreasonable. But what we can do, what we can say, what Trump should do is don't make problems worse, right? Don't give in to these interests and institutions that are opposed to you. And I think the Iran war is very much an incident in which that's occurring. So again, the claims of betrayal and, Trump, look, this isn't helpful politically. You need to focus on accomplishing clear, concrete political goals. And my goal, as I'm articulating here right now, is we need to focus on domestic policy and we need to get out of these unsettling and destructive foreign wars that pull us away from securing our way of life here at home. That's the most important thing. Trump can and will and has helped in that project, and we need to get back to it. We need to get back to it as soon as possible. I have a few questions here about the nature of the war itself. I think I'll close here just with an analysis of the war and the information I'm seeing. The first thing I want to start with when thinking about war and foreign policy, as someone who was in the military, though I did not serve in combat, you see this regardless, is the fog of war. It's very difficult to see what exactly is happening abroad. We don't have, there's a lot of reasons in war to lie. There's a lot of lying going on right now. Casualty rates, what's been hit, what hasn't been hit, whether or not the regime is degraded, interceptor versus launcher, math, ratios. These things are not they're not known with any degree of certainty. There are ways of guessing or making better or worse speculative judgments about what's happening in the war. But I think I want to caution people. If you're celebrating because you think the war will be over this week, you might be right, but then again, you could be very, very wrong. And if history is any guide, I think this war will probably go on a lot longer than people think, and I think it will be. That would be my instincts say that this is going to be a real thorn in our sides for a while. And the reason I say that is, Iran, it is not obvious to me that their capabilities have been fully degraded. And if they continue, what Iran needs right now, what its regime needs to do is simply to survive. If they are able to hold out and they're able to keep the conflict going and force the Americans and Israelis to spin down wealth and resources, they are doing political damage in the United States. They are harming Donald Trump. They are harming the Republican Party. The longer they can go on, the more blood that they can spill, the more chaos that they can sow in their near abroad, the harder this is for Trump to justify and build up goodwill among the people to continue this conflict. This was something that was launched out of the, really out of the blue. I mean, people who are tracking things knew it was a possibility, but the American people, there wasn't a big propaganda blitz to get them on board. If we continue to take heavy casualties in any way, that's going to be a problem for Trump and for the rest of the administration. And and regional civil war is going to leave a bad taste in Americans' mouths. This is the way it is. Bombing that school, killing all those schoolgirls, on accident. It seems pretty clear. American targeting, planners were aiming at the base next to the school, but they hit one and they killed a bunch of school-age girls. That's not the kind of thing that makes Americans feel warm and fuzzy about themselves, and it shouldn't. That's a bad thing. And war, of course, has collateral damage. But of course, if you're not in a war, then there isn't collateral damage, right? Then you don't have to worry about these questions. And that's a good thing. And we should not want to have to worry about what's going on in the Middle East. Who's getting bombed. A big problem for the American military is it cannot take any serious or heavy casualties. The loss of a single American destroyer would be a crisis, right? It would be a very real problem. Already, I was stunned. I think the most stunning thing about the war was watching Iranian drones. I watched this in Bahrain. The New York Times had this clip of an Iranian drone drops down onto the American base there and hits a radar installation and just detonates. I mean, it blows the thing up. And I've never seen anything like that, right? In American life, we're just not used to that kind of conflict. Normally, when the United States goes to war, we have crushing air supremacy from the very beginning. Nothing gets through, or almost nothing, right? In 1991, some Scud missiles did get through, hit a few targets, but by and large, the idea that Saddam Hussein was ever going to get a direct hit on American command and control node was just extremely improbable. It just didn't happen. Right? The United States had such dominance in the air and in ground forces that kind of threat wasn't possible. But we're seeing in this conflict is that the Iranians have some ability to harm, and strike at American installations abroad and able to hit targets from a long way away comparatively, the ability to use long-range fires. So that's if the Strait of Hormuz remains sealed for a long time, even with Trump saying he would take on maritime insurance contracts, there's still just the problem of physical security. If the Iranians are able to blow up at least even just one tanker passing through the strait, it's going to put the cost on the American taxpayer, and it's going to be an international crisis. The more that the American, political regime takes on, the more it stretches itself over these different kinds of tasks, the more there arises the possibility of a real humiliating, minor defeat in a sense, relatively minor defeat then becomes humiliating because there's this impression of American supremacy and dominance that has been built up for so long. So that's a very real problem. And though I've seen a lot of strutting and the bluster, we've got this under control, everything is fine, everything is done. Again, it isn't clear, right? If Iran has kept any sort of resources in reserve, this could be just an ongoing problem for months and God forbid, years. So there are real problems here, and it just takes one missile. It just takes one one missile getting through American air defenses and hitting an aircraft carrier to really make serious problems for the administration. It just takes one. And do we have enough of these systems in order to prevent that from happening? I can't say. I don't know. I hope so. I really do. I hope so. But of course, the problem, of course, on the other hand, if America wins, if we get a decisive victory here, whatever that means, I guess full Iranian capitulation, their government accepts that it is not going to be sovereign, can't develop nuclear weapons, needs to cut some kind of deal with the United States, needs to do what we tell them to do. Even if we accomplish those goals, it will serve as an incentive to future involvement. It will always yield to more intervention later. It will not be the end. And it's like this never-ending cycle of involvement. And it's the real forever war is the global civil war that's been raging since World War II and really honestly before. That just the sense of there's the righteous and then there are the wicked, and the righteous are going to defeat the wicked. And so we need injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That is an argument for permanent American empire. And as much as you see some on the online right talking about we based amoral geopolitical empire about interests, the policymakers themselves are thinking about morality. They're framing it, well, we're liberating the Iranian people. We're defeating bad guys. That moralistic, idealistic language always and everywhere is going to sneak in, even to the most hard-headed, realistic geopolitical thinker. You'll always find that view of justice will come back. And it turns out that view of justice is the real animating framework of everything else. The way you see the world, the way you understand who is and who is not a threat depends on what you think justice is, how you think you should live, and how you think you should engage with the world. And so, again, no matter how you slice it, I just don't see, there isn't a way to make this good for the American people. There just isn't. And so that's why I'm calling on the war to end. That's my advice. We need to, and there's a lot of ways that Trump could make that happen. He could declare victory. He could offer the Iranians something that they want. And you can, even now, even with as much of the breaking of faith and the fraught negotiations, there's always the possibility that we can make things better. And the treaty of peace and amity between the United States and Iran would be good for both of us. It'd be good for the world. It'd be good for the Middle East. We should reduce those. We should eliminate those sanctions. We should get rid of them simply. We should let the dominant framework in the Middle East be one that does not have the United States involved, except to the extent of making money. There it is. No more. We don't need to mess around with any of the regional powers and what they're doing. So I think that vision, a vision of restraint, a vision of focus, it's not even restraint, it's focus. We're just doing what we're supposed to, and we're leaving everything else aside. That's, you can't do everything. You shouldn't try and do everything. You shouldn't let yourself be swept up in utopian moral crusades. That's not going to make you happy in your life. Focus on the things you can control. That's as good of advice for individuals as it is for governments. So I think that's a good stopping point. It's a good way to end this conversation for now. And I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for giving me your time. Again, I want to encourage you, no matter where you fall on these issues, to stop and think about what I've said and think about counter arguments and think about what you yourself believe and what kind of country you want to live in, what kind of goals you want to achieve. If I can inspire you to do that, I've succeeded. And I think this will get better with time. I look forward to it. This will be a long-term project designed to help me both think about these issues for myself and also to share what I know with others and hopefully benefit those who listen. So with that, I want to thank you for listening to the first episode of Lippincott Talk. It's been a pleasure. See you next time.